Lifeboat Live. We have 4 simple rules. Number 1, we don't discuss politics, ever. Number 2, this is not a religious channel, and while you might hear people say, God bless you, or I'm going to pray for you, or I wouldn't have gotten through this without my faith, that's fine. What's not fine is to say, my God is better than your God, or here's why you're not getting into heaven. It's not going to fly. Number 3, we believe wholeheartedly if you can't control your tongue, then you can't control your life. So while on board, there's not going to be any cursing in the live chat, period. And number 4, there is no room for mean people on the lifeboat. Because we discuss very sensitive things from people's past in our group setting, we got to protect those people. The only way they feel confident and comfortable discussing those things is in an environment that is free of trolls and mean people. So if you're a mean person or you're a troll, we're going to block you for life. And if your account happens to be less than 24 hours old, we're probably a little suspicious right from the word go. Why? Well, because there are people in this world who enjoy being cruel solely for the sake of being cruel. It's not going to fly here. But if you're here because you're trying to get sober and live your best life, then you might find that the lifeboat is just that, a lifeboat. I'm Captain Tommy Scoville, and we will see you on deck. Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Captain Tommy Scoville, and you are on the Lifeboat. It's been a long time since I had a really good rant. I want to welcome everybody. I hope you had a good weekend, so to speak. It's the start of your weekend. It's the end of ours. We missed you. We really did, and we're happy to be back. I think it's probably a great idea that we take a couple of days off. Everybody, I know the whole crew has seen how busy my partner has been. The son did not give Mark any time off. In fact, I think he's probably worked harder in the last couple of days than he has in a long time. And if you're not following that, you should be. Head over to Wages World. A lot of really cool. It's just, I don't know. I'm fascinated, and the more that the son gets active, the more fascinating it is. It's pretty cool stuff to watch. But so before I get rolling, I'm going to give the normal disclaimer. All I ask is that you pay attention, okay? Because over the last 2 days, I answered all of my emails, right? There may be a couple that I missed, but I answered, a truckload of emails, and some of them were absolutely beautiful. I want to thank all of the people that have reached out. This season's emails have been just awesome. They really have. They touch my heart on a regular basis. And in fact, I say, "Oh, you got to read this," and I take it to people and say, "Oh man, you got to hear what this person just said." And nothing private. I mean, but the people that talk about the effect that the lifeboat is having, and it's just really really beautiful stuff. So, but today I'm going to be talking about the perfect storm that has landed us where we are. When the new statistics came out, and we broke that 100,000 deaths a year, that mark. That is not current, right? It takes a long time to get all of that stuff put together. So it's usually a year behind. And I assure you people, it's not accurate, right? And I said that the previous year, and unfortunately we were right. And unfortunately, we're going to be right again. And as I've said so many times before, a lot of those deaths, it's so underreported, it's incredible. There are deaths that don't see autopsies. There are all kinds of things that don't factor into the statistics, right? People who crash cars because they overdosed, or all kinds of other things that just don't get put into the mix. But make no mistake, I'm going to lay the blame where the blame needs to be laid, and don't send me an email to tell me what side of the aisle I'm on, right? Because this perfect storm started in 1980. Okay. I was 10 in 1980, but that's when this started. That's when everything started to come off the rails to create where we are at today in this country and in this world, with what's going on with the people passing away from overdoses. I have talked many times in the past about um, certain aspects of this perfect storm, but I've never put it all together. And today we're going to. And insert your jokes here with the glasses, but I would like to read something that I have referenced before in the past. I have talked many times about how a doctor from Boston, Massachusetts, by the name of Herschel Jick, did a his study with a graduate student slash secretary that worked with him by the name of Porter, put together the Porter and Jick study. Okay. Now, the Porter Jick study was what was used to justify the fact that there were opiates that weren't dangerous and that we could write prescriptions for them for hangnails or mild headaches or anything else, because this was one of the safest ways in the entire world to treat pain. Now, keep in mind, people, if I were to say to you, I intend to read you the entire study, right? Most of you would bail because, good Lord, how long would it take to read a study of this magnitude, right? Well, let's give it a try. Ready? Recently, we examined our current files to determine the incidence of narcotic addiction in 39,946 hospitalized medical patients who were monitored consecutively. Although there were 11,882 patients who received at least one narcotic preparation, there were only 4 cases of reasonably well-documented addiction in patients who had no history of addiction. 11,882, only 4 people developed addiction. The addiction was considered major in only one instance. The drugs implicated were metaprine in 2 patients, Percodan in 1 patient, and hydromorphone, right, which would be dilaudid in 1 case. We conclude that despite widespread use of narcotic drugs in hospital, the development of addiction is rare in medical patients with no history of addiction. There's your study. That's it, people. That is the entire study. Now you say to yourself, that's ridiculous. That's not a study. Well, it's not. What he did was he asked a graduate student to go through the computer and pull up some statistics, because computers were very new in hospitals, and they thought, well, this is cool, and I bet people will like this. And the New England Journal of Medicine printed the letter. Jick didn't even realize the letter was printed. This was not something that was a really big deal to anybody. But the Food and Drug Administration of the United States of America, right? The people whose job it is to make sure that we're all safe, took that and allowed it to be printed in the literature of all of the people manufacturing OxyContin and every other painkiller you could think of. They all wanted to cite this. Hey, 11,000 patients, only 4 of them got addicted. But if you read the study, air quotes, study, these are people that were given medication in hospitals and then tracked afterwards, right? This is not people who were put on this stuff for any length of time, right? So people that were just given one dose of, one prescription of this stuff to take home, 4 people got addicted. So they said, boy, this is safer than all get out, right? This is just really, really safe stuff. This allowed them to manufacture a drug called OxyContin. And we all know what OxyContin is, right? It is a time-released version of Percodan. Now, the Food and Drug Administration, the people whose job it is to make sure that we are safe, thought that Percodan is handed out in 5 milligrams and 10 milligram tablets, right? And they knew that they were addicting in certain instances, and there were people who had to struggle with it. But them saying, but this configuration of a time-released version of it will not be, is like saying a beer could be addicting, but a 6-pack will be safe. They allowed a version of this that is 80 milligrams over a time-released period of time. So the idea was that, let's say that you get a pill bottle that says, okay, you're going to take Percodan 2 tablets 3 times a day for pain. All right, so they would go 6 times 5, or if you were taking the extra strength, 6 times 10. Okay, so that's 60 milligrams over the course of the day. We're just going to give you 80 milligrams, and we're going to allow that to seep into your system for an entire day. And that was deemed safe. At one time in my life, I was getting legal prescriptions from a doctor for 12.80s a day. And the doctor looked me square in the face and said, "You got nothing to worry about. There was a study that has been done on this stuff, and it is not addicting." Study wasn't done on OxyContin. OxyContin, the manufacturers of whom just quoted the study. But one thing had nothing to do with the other. There was no OxyContin in 1980. The study was done in 1980, people, and it wasn't a study. It was just a letter. In fact, that's 5 sentences. A couple of them were real run-ons, but it was not a very lengthy discussion on opiates and what it can do to you. Okay, so here starts the perfect storm. Now the FDA is allowing all of these companies to say that this stuff isn't dangerous. So doctors who are being wined and dined and flown to the Bahamas to hear about this new miracle drug, 600 doctors sitting in a room listening to this every single weekend. And then they would fly in another. The people that were promoting this weren't even leaving the Bahamas, because every single weekend, a whole new crew of doctors would be flown down there on the manufacturer's dollar for a beautiful weekend getaway with you and your family, so that we can teach you just how safe OxyContin is. And they wrote prescriptions for everything. I mean, literally everything. There were people that never should have had any kind of a strong opiate, but this was so much safer. Just read the literature. This starts the opioid epidemic. And then, as happens so often, a knee-jerk reaction within the United States government and the Food and Drug Administration said, "Okay, listen, we're not writing prescriptions for this anymore." You see, pill mills popped up all over the US, where doctors were literally writing, in some cases, 300 or 400 prescriptions a day. Wrap your brain around that. 300 or 400 a day. Do you know where I first heard that? On the prison bus coming from Oklahoma to the airport to fly to my new prison, because I sat next to a doctor on the bus and then on Con Air who had been arrested. And I said, "They arrested you for writing prescriptions?" He said, "Well, admittedly, there were days I wrote 350, 360 of them." 360. Imagine, just think of how long it would take to just write one. You think you got time to see these patients? So they're pill milling it out. Now, people in the US, the Food and Drug Administration lets everybody who manufactures a drug, they give them a certain period of time to recoup how much investment it took to create the drug. Keep in mind, this drug already existed. This is just Percodan. So what they needed to do was come up with a way for this to become time released. And anybody here who's ever abused any of these drugs knows exactly what they came up with, right? That whatever wrapped that pill, because if you scraped off the coating, which addicts found out real quick, you eliminated that time release and you could get all 80 milligrams at once. But see, the FDA allowed them to charge, even in pharmacies, $50 a pill to recoup all of that massive research it must have taken to come up with that time released plastic coating. This created a black market that was incredible. So now this stuff is getting sold on the streets, and it's getting sold to people who should never be doing 80 milligrams of a drug because they didn't have any opiate tolerance to start with. What they should have had was 5 milligrams, but they took 80 at once, and the overdoses started. And now people began to panic, and the addictions really started to kick in, and these things got nicknames like hillbilly heroin, because there were certain parts of the country where this was really, really rampant. And all of a sudden, they realized that they had a real problem on their hand. So the knee-jerk reaction was, they said, "We're not writing any more prescriptions for this stuff. In fact, we're yanking it. They're not going to allow the 80 to be made the way it used to be. You can't snort it. You can't smoke it. You can't do anything." They made them reformulate it. And the 80 basically disappeared outside of hospice. You understand? So now all of these people who are hopelessly addicted to this stuff had a couple of options. They could go and stand on a line at a methadone clinic, or they could try to get their drugs on the street. And if you don't know what a methadone clinic was like back in those days, watch the interview that we did with Rip Curl Readiness, because he did a beautiful, beautiful job of articulating just what that was like. So did my partner. Both of them in their interviews talked about what that process was like, and it was demoralizing and humiliating and time consuming, and you were just treated like a leper, and it was a frightening place to be. It really was. So now you've got all of these people who are addicted to drugs, and they have to go to the street, and they find out that heroin is considerably cheaper. right? These pills are still $50 a piece at a pharmacy, which means on the street they were $1 a milligram. People were getting $80 for an Oxycontin 80. Now that they've been cut off, they're going to the street to try to find these. They're going to go to lowest common denominator people, and they went to heroin. Trust me, I'm that guy, right? That's what happened to my life. I don't blame anybody, but that's exactly what happened to me. And now everybody's using heroin, and the overdoses are going mad. At the same time, the in the great scheme of things, there was a great change in our relationship on the world stage with the big red flagged country that we talk about, right? You know who I'm talking about. Well, for the first time, they were going to be allowed into the trade deals. They were now part of the world stage in terms of the economic development of their country. They were allowed to sell in places they had never sold any products that they made. So all of a sudden, instead of shipping a couple of packages a year to the US, they're shipping millions of packages a day to the US. Then companies began to realize how cheap the labor was. And now every single major manufacturer in America had a factory in this country. And they saw an opportunity. And here's the reason why. We see this as economic development, right? When we talk about trade and trade deals, we're talking about selling our product in other countries and buying products from other countries. And it makes the world a better place, no question. But that's not how our friends view this. The company, I mean, the country with the big red out of hell with it. China sees this really differently, right? They see it as war, right? Economics is just a part of warfare to them. And if you don't believe me, read Sun Tzu or read any of the other literature from that country. So now they had a super highway to start dumping any drug they wanted into the US and making a lot of money in the process. And this creates the next rung in the perfect storm. Then we start to change our border policies. Now let's say we capture 1,000 people at the southern border, and I'm going to have people that tell me I'm racist. But let me tell you something. In 3 decades, do you know how many times I bought heroin from people who were not in this country illegally? Honestly, 5, maybe 6 times. This is if you doubt this, people read Dreamland, right? The book by Sam Quinones, who talks so eloquently about this. It's amazing. But what happened is you bring somebody across the border, right? And they say, I'm here for asylum, 5 or 6,000 of them. Well, originally we would just let them come into the country and we'd say, okay, look, you just have to show up at a court. Then we started busing them to other parts of the country. A lot of them ended up in Ohio. A lot of them ended up in Pennsylvania. And then they made phone calls back and the drug cells got set up. And now heroin was going into places that it had never been. You understand? So we have a country that doesn't love us. They've said so. You know, they're not very fond of us as a country. So they're shipping in drugs as fast as they can do it. And they want a bigger piece of the market because to them, this is warfare. And the best way to get that piece of the market was to stop worrying about someone else manufacturing a drug nearby and start making it themselves. So the synthetics started coming into the United States, primarily fentanyl. This year, 12,000 tons are going to be seized in this country. Can you wrap your dome around that, people? I mean, you hear all of the time about just how potent this stuff is. And my little state that I grew up in had not had in 1969, they had a heroin bust and then not another one ever. And now heroin use in that state is up 89% since the previous year. 89%. You know, this is the epidemic has been fueled by a lot of really bad decisions. There are always knee-jerk reactions. We don't want to be racist to the people at the border. We don't. We want to provide asylum, right? It's the right thing to do. But so what we've done is we have allowed a super conduit to come into the US. And the cartels ain't stupid. When they realize that every single person that walks across the border has to be signed in, they got to find out who they are, they got to find out where they're from and all of that. The same border agents that are supposed to be stopping people from smuggling drugs are the people that are taking down all of that information. So they'll take 150 people trying to cross the border, send them at one spot. And as soon as they get picked up, the next group goes through carrying backpacks full of drugs. Now, that wouldn't have been a problem if they were smuggling cocaine or heroin, because a backpack, as much as it may seem like a ton of drugs, it's just not, right? In the scheme of 330 million people in the country, it's not a very big load. But with fentanyl, with the stuff that's coming from China, you got a backpack full of fentanyl. You could keep a decent sized city going for a long period of time because they're going to cut that 12 to 15 to 1. So if you got a pound of it in your backpack, there's 15 to 16 pounds that are going to hit the street. If you've got 75 pounds in your backpack, then a city the size of the one that I currently live in would be good for months. Do you understand? All of the dominoes that start falling in one direction, it just continues to stack up. And all of these things are starting to drop our fellow citizens like flies. And we've talked about this so many times on the show. I mean, what does 100,000 Americans look like in real life? Well, pick 120 houses near where you live and empty them, right? Every day. Every day. The neighborhood I live in doesn't have 127 homes in it, right? So every single day, my neighborhood would disappear of every one of its inhabitants from drug overdoses. And these aren't statistics on a government chart. They're mothers and fathers, they're brothers and sisters, they're sons and daughters. And they're the lifeblood of this country in so many more ways than one. This is now the number one cause of death for everybody of military age. Between the ages of 18 to 48, used to be 45. It's now 48. Between the ages of 18 and 48, this is the number one cause of death in our country. I mean, it's car wrecks and, everything else. Nothing's touching this. You're more likely to die of a drug overdose than a car wreck. You're more likely to die of a drug overdose than cancer if you're within the ages of 18 to 48. It makes you scratch your head and say, how is that possible? Well, this is how it's possible. It starts with a stupid letter written to somebody in 1980. Now, I'll tell you what, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, right? 4 decades. How many different administrations, Republican and Democrat, have gone through in 4 decades? Because the blood's on every one of their hands. I'm not here to toast Republicans or to toast Democrats. Is this political? Yeah, it has to be. Because when politics and drug overdoses intersect, well, then we're going to comment. And this is really, now that you step back and you look at it, this is the perfect storm. And the reason that shows like this and the reason that talking about things like this are important is because, number one, not a lot of people talking about it. Truthfully, there just are not a lot of people that talk about this. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you watch the news tonight, they'll say something about overdoses. But reporting on something is not the same as reporting why something is happening. You understand? There's a very big difference. And the policies of the last 4 decades have created a real serious problem that's about to get a whole hell of a lot worse. As we did, if you've been on the boat for any length of time, you heard us talk about nitazines and phytonitazines, and now those overdoses are popping up all over the place. And mark my words, the reason that we're going to see it more is because it's cheaper to produce than fentanyl, considerably. The reason that for the first time ever, we've got more fentanyl being busted than heroin is because it's cheaper to produce. Well, phytonitazines are even cheaper to produce, but they're less stable, right? And that, which is terrifying because it's not like fentanyl is a particularly stable drug, but the nit family, right? The nitazine family of opiates is the most unpredictable and dangerous. And now, since, make no mistake, people, this is warfare. It is absolutely warfare. So they've begun to make designer drugs that were not in existence when I was a drug addict. You go back, a practicing drug addict. I'm still a drug addict. When I was using, these zombie-like drugs where they are mixing really cheap benzodiazepines with really cheap opiates. I mean, you knowing full well that both of those are respiratory depressants, knowing full well that usually when someone makes a decision to try a drug like this, it's probably because they've had a few drinks, a third respiratory depressant. The odds of somebody surviving that, if it's their first go around, honestly, your chances are better of dying than not dying. So, I mean, when I was 16, when you guys were 15, 16 years old, and we were starting to experiment with drugs, the stuff we were doing was kid stuff compared to what they're now experimenting with. When they bust people, a guy just got busted here in Nevada, and he had duffel bags full of fentanyl. Now you go duffel bags. Well, it's already in pills, right? Stuff's already in pills, and the the really accomplished drug addicts, the people that have been on this stuff a long time, know exactly what they're getting. So they'll take that and go, all right, that's probably 4 doses. They'll crush it up, put it into 4 piles, stick it in a spoon, and more than likely, I mean, it's going to get them eventually. They're going to hit a hot spot and it's going to kill them. But the people that are in real danger are the people that are just experimenting, who pick up a pill that says, Percocet 30 on it. And they go, yeah, it's just a perk 30. I mean, the truth is, we're getting to the point where the number of real Percocet 30s on the street, I mean, it's probably 20 or 30 to 1, fakes versus real ones. We're not writing enough prescriptions for that stuff for it to be found in the levels that it's being found. In in cities across the world, they're showing pictures of, they have posters, they've got billboards showing you the difference between a real Percocet 30 and a fake, because it's gotten to that point, and we're making headway. Believe it or not, we are. But we're not making headway to stop the flow or to stop this crisis, but we're making headway to save lives, which is a good thing. Laws being passed like giving out the Narcan and nasal sprays, and not having anybody have to pay for it, not have to have a prescription for it. That's good stuff. Changing the laws so that you can be in possession of fentanyl strips, right? So that somebody can say, well, is this really heroin? There are a lot of people in this country that think that that is promoting drug use. And as you've heard Mark and I say 100 times, there are a lot of areas where it's hard to determine what's right and what's wrong. We're not a group of people that wants to do anything to promote drug use, obviously, right? But the prospect of knowing that the next shot can kill somebody and and take them off the planet, I want everything that can be done to protect people from that. I really do. you know and there's this misconception that if you give out free needles, right, to stop the spread of AIDS, that there's somebody out there that's going to go, hey, they're giving out free needles, I think I'll try heroin, right? That's really a pretty stupid concept. You understand? I mean, honestly, that's a pretty stupid concept. But it's the exact same concept of, they're handing out fentanyl test strips. Maybe I'll just start partying. These are really a way to protect people who are abusing this stuff every single day. Oh, and there's one thing I failed to mention, and I'm sure that my bobble-headed partner would have called me on it. But the other thing that really compounded this was the worldwide shutdown because of the C plus math. Think about what happened. Everybody had to stay home, right? And then they got all this free money. Government gives everybody piles of cash and tells them they have to stay home. And the statistics are already in on this. What the lockdown did to promote addiction in this country is staggering. I mean, the rates of addiction are through the roof, right? All this free money, all this free time. We talk about it all the time on the boat, right? Free time is not a good thing. So, do I think that there were a lot of people that had never done any dope who decided that all of a sudden they were going to become, addicted? Probably not. I don't think that that's, how it, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that that was probably the wave. I think was people that, would occasionally party, but they had to get up for work, right? They had things they had to do. Well, all of a sudden they don't, right? All of a sudden they're just sitting around. They can't go out. They can't do anything. And all businesses are shut down. I assure you the dope man didn't shut down. I assure you they continued to make deliveries. all over the place. So you're sitting around with a pocket full of money and no responsibilities. This is the kind of stuff that breeds, very, very serious issues. So this is the perfect storm. Now, if if you listen to this and you think it's America's fault that I'm a drug addict, then you're not catching what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the reason that we have the number of overdose deaths that we have has a lot to do with decisions that were made by this country. And I'm not doing that just to be a jerk, and I'm not doing that for views. I'm doing it because there are people who listen to this who actually do something about it. I know you guys think I'm probably in love with Seventh Son because I bring this up every single time I do one of these shows. But the number of letters that this man has written to try to do something about this, that's the hope of these shows, is that a couple of people get pissed, right? A couple of people start calling lawmakers, because the only way to get anything done is to be a thorn in the side of a lawmaker. If they think that the wind is blowing this way, they're going to go with it. If they think that gets votes, they're going to go with it. And I hate to be a cynic, but if it was, getting everybody addicted, if that means that they're going to get votes, they might just go with that too. I mean, honestly, I think like anything else, there are politicians who get into it because they care. 3 or 4 of them. The rest of them, it's a power grab. And, but if they think that this is something that's going to bring people to the polls, then damn it, they're going to do things about it. I promise you. And there have been some headway made. There are some things that have happened. But again, the reason that I bring this up is not to get you a get out of jail free card in terms of responsibility. I was written a prescription for 80 Oxycontin, for 12 Oxycontin 80s a day for a long period of time. And within a month or two of getting that script, I was selling them and buying heroin with it because it was huge money. And it didn't matter to me what I was taking for the pain. And then that obviously translated into much larger amounts. And I ended up robbing banks, and the rest of the story, right? But it wasn't the government's fault. And it wasn't the doctor that wrote me the prescription's fault. It was my fault. It's just the way it is. A little personal accountability goes a long freaking way if you're actually trying to get sober. It goes a long way. And the reason that I ended up the way I did, it's not my mom and dad's fault. It's not the government's fault. It's not the dope dealer's fault. It's not the doctors or big pharma or any of that crap. But the decisions that are being made at the top levels around the world are causing a lot of death. And the only way that anything is going to get done is the inverted pyramid, right? The people at the bottom got to scream, and the people above them got to scream. And eventually that will reach to the top, levels of government, and then something might get done. But people, I promise you, if you think it's bad now, wait until they're telling you that they just seized 2 tons of phytonidazines instead of 2 tons of fentanyl, because that's coming. Drug manufacturers, legal or otherwise, are going to get the cheapest product that they can possibly get their hands on because the profit margin is longer, right? Economics 101. And right now, the cheapest and the easiest way to make a very, very strong opiate that people can do. And I say that as a caveat because the cheapest way to do it um, is is a something that is taken off in other countries that is called crocodile, that I don't think we're going to see as you know, it was very bad in Russia. In fact, yeah, I think that was probably the epicenter of that. And believe it or not, people, there's only 2 ingredients in crocodile, and it's codeine and diesel fuel. Astounding, right? They literally just dump buckets and buckets and buckets of codeine pills into, barrels of diesel fuel, and then they dry that out, and that's what they're
I
working
would
with.
I would say this too, Tommy, that we got our issues over here, but you got to understand that we are not the only superpower on the planet. So when you start talking about crocodile in another superpower's country,
Oh yeah.
I mean it's all tied together, guys. It really is, in my opinion. But that's a big subject. But I do think when you have crises like that on big countries that are really, they feud all the time, but they're two different things. But at the same time, it's the same result. Um,
No question.
it's just yeah, you gotta wonder.
As crazy as it is, the reason that the reason that crocodile doesn't have the same effect that we get with fentanyl with other things is because they say literally that it almost has a 100% mortality rate. It's like 98 point something. The mortality rate is just if you start doing it, you're going to die on it. It's just that simple. And when people die that fast, they don't really have time to develop a circle of 25 people that they infect because that is the way drugs work, right? If you dump a huge pile of drugs on one person, he's going to infect 30 or 40 other people who now start to create a market for that. Well, the people die so fast with crocodile that it can't really take off at the same level. People have to live 5 or 6 years to really spread something like that. And yeah, but you're right, this is one of those things that is reaching across. You can get into to conspiracy theories and all. If you start doing a deep dive on this, people, and I have done deep dives on this for days. There are people that believe this was population control, and it was always intended to be population control. And just as my partner just said, if it's the exact same thing on every single continent, right? So they sort of target different continents with different things because there are, depending on where you go, but it does seem like every continent's got a really serious problem with something. And right now, fentanyl really seems to be a worldwide thing. It's really catching on everywhere, and the reason is it is an amazing buzz, right? It's a very very strong drug, and this is something that I don't know that we've touched on a lot here, but there's a term with opiates, like users will say, "Does it have decent legs?" Right, referring to how long between the time you take it and the time you need it, right? So there are drugs that, heroin usually has about 8 hours before you need the next shot or you're going to start getting sick. Really good heroin that we know with excellent legs might, be 12 hours or 14 hours. And addicts usually will tell you there's two things they're looking for, right? They're looking for the initial buzz and then how long are the legs. The trouble with the fentanyl and the stuff that they're bringing in is the initial buzz is incredible. It's so much stronger than anything else out there, and it has no legs at all. These guys often shoot, or gals often shoot 4, 5, 6 times a day because it's a straight up and a straight down. You get really, really wasted and you nod out, and by the time you wake up, you need more. And it's creating zombies. Mark has shown some incredible videos on here, and
I'm gonna show a picture right now if it's all right.
okay. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely. You
um,
don't have to look far on the internet to see this
no,
stuff.
it's you don't, guys. And here, I'm just gonna flash the picture. You guys can look at it. Because we get, people start wondering, and where's this opiate crisis at? Because they're living in their own little world, right? They don't see it, and that's a legit thing. Sometimes people don't. They're not in that world, but it will eventually. It has spread to the suburbs, and well, here's the first picture. If you're ever wondering if there's an opiate crisis, just look at that one capture. That's all you got to do. That is on a public street in Philadelphia.
Right in the U.S. of A.
In Pennsylvania. I'm sorry, it's Kensington, but it's essentially Philadelphia. Um, you can count how many people are laid out right there. There's eight. I think there's 8 people in that one small, not even a half a block. You're talking, gosh, I can't even put the distance on there. There are so many people laid out right there, and it's worse. It's worse. People ask me, well, how can that get any worse? Well, let me show you how it gets worse. There you go. What would ever drive somebody to do that? Just ask yourself. That's all I can say. I don't even have to say nothing on that picture because it's brutal, guys. That's what this thing does to people. And they knew this. And that's what we're talking
Right.
about it like this. And this is why they know it's got control over us. And that was the whole point. And I would even take it back because, most of us live and know somebody that fought in Vietnam. Right? Guys, that's where they really first started seeing our soldiers coming back with these opiates.
Yep, no
Okay.
question.
Now, whether or not that was part of what was going on, but that definitely is the spotlight that happened that made somebody's mind click, say, hey, if we can get, our enemies over here or whatever, taking this stuff, look what it can do. And you can already see a bunch of Americans on it, addicted, right? And back in the 70s, they considered it a horrible thing that 7,000 people a year were dying on heroin.
Yeah, exactly. It was called the crisis.
Yeah,
1973 was the peak, and I think it was 78 or 7,900, and they were absolutely beside themselves.
yeah,
And there was really not the same presence with social media and all that. We're just with everything going on. I saw a great comment from the I think is something that should be highlighted. Caucasian Sasquatch said, I got out right before, the fen really started to hit. And I think that the reason probably both of us are here, my brother, is because we both got out. You know what I mean? I have no doubt whatsoever that if I had stayed in it 2 or 3 more years, it would have been the end, because I could get fentanyl at the end of my run. I could get fentanyl, and the reason that, but I mean, it was not exclusively that. You could also get heroin, and there were people selling both, and the reason that we didn't do it was because of how much of it you had to do. Like every once in a while, it was fun if somebody else was paying for it or whatever, but it was far more expensive because number one, it was more expensive because of how strong it was. They were charging more money for it back then. Now it is cheaper than what heroin was, when I was doing it. It's gotten to the point, and it's just going to keep getting cheaper, people. It is. It's going to keep getting cheaper. Again, basic economics. What ends up happening is there's so much of it on the street that the only way people can compete is to do one of two things: make it stronger, right? Or sell it cheaper.
yep.
And you get to a point where you really can't make it any stronger because every
It
shot will kill
will
someone,
kill somebody. Yep.
right? So now almost everybody is selling the same strength. So now what do? Now you cut the price, and you cut the price, and you cut the price, and you cut the price. And it's creating again the perfect storm, you know?
Yeah.
By the way,
Yeah, I'm going to address that real quick. So they should build a fence around those areas. Well, you know what? They'd have to build a fence around your house too, because I guarantee you this is around everywhere that you look. You just don't see it.
well, and it's a very interesting comment, Tara. And number one, I tend to agree, but the world went nuts when we said, you know what, we need a fence to keep these drugs out, right? That was actually a real push, and it got tied to racism, and it got tied to all of these other things, and unfortunately, that too is a part of this perfect storm, right? Our southern border, and I'm not being racist to say that's where all of the drugs come in from, right? Doesn't make anybody down there a bad person. It doesn't make the country bad or any of that. It's just a stone cold fact. That's where it comes from. And we're not tightening that security. We're making it less. And
let me say this, Tommy, real quick.
Please.
We don't usually plug anybody else's content or anything like that, and I'm not doing that here on YouTube. But there is most of us have Netflix nowadays. There is a show on Netflix it's a documentary, and it's like, I don't know, it's like 3 episodes or something like that. It's called The Pharmacist. And what it is there is a pharmacist that in West Virginia that started to notice this crisis himself. And then it affected his son.
Oh, yeah, I watched this.
His son got shot, killed. So he started really diving into that after that. He wanted to figure out what the heck is going on. And I'm not going to, spoil the ending, because there is some spoilers there, and it makes it really interesting if you don't know the whole story. But there was a doctor, get this, guys, and this was if you were to see this doctor, you wouldn't think, because it was some short little woman that ran a 24-hour clinic to where she wasn't even there all the time, just handing out oxy scripts.
All day.
24 hours a day. People waiting in the lines got so big, people were in the parking lot for 6 to 8 hours, sometimes longer, trying to get these scripts.
And it's a 15 minutes. You're in with the doctor less than 15 minutes in and out, and people are waiting for 6 to 8 hours.
Right.
I mean, that's terrifying if you think about it.
And
it really is.
And in this place, they weren't even doing that. They were actually walking. At one point, they actually walked out to the waiting room and just started handing scripts out.
Yep.
It was crazy. Craziest thing I'd ever seen in my life. But what got that, another reason why I bring that up is because it reminds me of Seventh Son. Okay? Because this pharmacist seen that, and even after his son passed away, it took a long time. He didn't give up on it, and he found this clinic in West Virginia and got it shut down. Okay,
Yeah.
so what I'm saying is that, and I think he even lost his pharmacy. There's a lot of different things that happened there, but please go watch that. It is something that, and and I'm not trying to, put triggers out there for anybody to go watch. As a matter of fact, I'm taking that. I should take that picture off the screen.
There you
Anyway,
go.
all right, sorry about that, guys.
That's all right.
I don't like to leave those kinds up there very long because those can be triggers for people. But
Yeah.
I want people to see it. At least
You
get
know,
a
there's
glimpse.
there's two comments here that I think are important. Cemetery 76 says the only way drugs stop coming in is if everybody quits. And I'll tell you something. I've said this so many times. You can't fight the war on drugs, right? From the you have to fight it from the demand side, not the supply side. I do agree with you. The reason that we fight this thing the way that we do, and that this is the platform that we've chosen, is because we believe that if you can keep your kids from getting involved in dope, and if every parent just said, I don't care about the drug war, but my kids are never going to do any. And if every parent could do that successfully, then it wouldn't take long before, they weren't bringing it in, because if people don't buy your product, then you stop shipping it. He's absolutely right. And the other one was from Scott, who said, every city and small town has this issue now. I was born in a town that literally is in the hundreds, not thousands, in a very, very small state in the Northeast. And yeah, there are people. I mean, there's such an epidemic in that they call it a city now, which is kind of funny, but there's such an epidemic of opioid deaths in that city that, like I said, Vermont's up 89%, right? Over, from one year to the next. It's absolutely
And,
terrifying.
and something else, guys. I talk about the billboard all the time, where it's just a picture of a bunch of different careers, people, and all that. And at the bottom of the billboard, it says, pick out the opiate addict. You can't do it because it hits everybody, right? We talk about functioning, the non functioning addicts. And a lot of times in these suburban areas, those are functioning addicts because they've got the money to hide it.
Right.
Okay, that is
Yeah. Amen.
that's a big deal here, guys.
Yep.
You go into the inner city where they don't have that kind of money, so they're forced to just get it however they can. And a lot of the suburban areas, and this is something that doesn't really get talked about, but that those are, as far as on the social scale or whatever you want to call it, the suburban areas typically the money there is a lot more. But what you're going to start to see, and what we did see already, and it's now happening, but these people that were functioning or whatever eventually will go to these inner city areas to get their drug, and that's how it starts for them. And then they keep
Yep.
going back, and then they find that, hey, I've got $1,000 here. I can do whatever I can and do whatever I buy, and then you go back home, and then they use more because they got more of it in their hand, and
Yep.
it just a snowball, and then eventually, guess what? They're one of those people laying right there on the street.
Yep, exactly. I've watched. I can't tell you. I've seen stockbrokers, who ended up homeless because of this stuff. But Mitchell Hickey says, "I'm 25, male cannabis users struggle with energy drinks. We're all human, though." Hey, let me
Yeah.
welcome to the Lifeboat.
Yep.
Number one, look, man. There's nobody here ever that's going to judge you for anything. Everybody here is struggling with something, right? Yeah, I drink way more energy drinks than I should. Uh, aside from a lot of, but for 30 plus years, my drug of choice was heroin, and I went to prison for bank robbery. So if you've never seen some of the early stuff, my partner on the other side of the glass was has been sober now. Is 11 years, correct, Mark?
Yep. Yep.
11 years, but also struggled, fairly mightily with opiates. Nobody on the Lifeboat judges anyone for anything. And like we like to say around here, if you ever decide that you want to quit any of those habits, we're going to be there for you, and we're going to try to help you every single step of the way in order to get sober. We're going to love you, every step. And if by some chance you don't, decide to quit, we're going to be here and we're going to love you every step of the way. Doesn't change, man. We know what it's like. Everybody here knows what it's like.
Yeah, and people make again, guys. I would also add to that what's different about us and what we do here is even when we make mistakes, we still accept you back into the fold, even when it's
Oh, absolutely.
when it's a mistake against us. You know, if you've done something to us or whatever, you come right back in. Ain't nobody gonna be nothing. You know, honestly, as long as you can, do what you need to do to get back here. And I hope that people do.
Thank you, Lady Crispin. That's very kind of you. I really appreciate that. It is an important subject, and it's not something, you know. I'll be honest. My partner and I wrestle, with doing these because we feel like if we're not beating the drum, there's not a whole lot of people that are. They love to report. Don't get me wrong. I mean, because seeing pictures like the one that we just posted, that gets people to stop and look. But unfortunately, the reporting just tends to be, "Hey, we just hit 100,000." But the issues that are driving this and the things that are behind it
They're
aren't really discussed, and
they're
that
they're not
is the problem.
they're not offering any solutions.
Correct. Or
And
even taking a good hard look at what happened.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly.
Unfortunately, everybody has an agenda. Ah, thank you, Mitch. We're glad you're here. We really are. Unfortunately, everybody has an agenda, right? It's in the Republicans' best interest to blame this on the Democrats. It's in the Democrats' best interest to blame this on the Republicans. And unfortunately, while they're slinging mud at one another, people are dying. If they get together and say, "Holy crap, this happened when Bush was in office. This happened when Clinton was in office. This happened when Trump was in office. This happened when Obama was in office." If they could all just get together, say, "Look, this has been 4 decades of this. Let's get our what together and try to come up with a solution." And it may never happen.
Well,
But if it does, I'm going to Seventh Son's house to buy him, new furniture and something to eat
yeah, no kidding. Yeah,
because it's people like that are going to make the difference. It's the truth.
and you just hammered your own point home there. I don't know if you realize you did it. you you wonder who is doing this, right? It's not just one side or the other.
Oh no.
It really, I mean, you just put it in perfectly because you just named all without even saying right or left. You just started naming people, and
Yeah.
and you wonder, and I think most of us know the answer to this, that they know, they know what they're doing, guys. Okay, these
Make no mistake.
these people up here have, especially at that level that we're talking here, they have every piece of intelligence that they're ever going to need. I mean, come on, let's just be real about it. So at any time, any one of those guys could have stood up and tried to make a difference on that, and none of them did, and they won't until we make it happen.
Correct. Until they're afraid that we're going to them out of office. That's what's going to get it done. Tommy Bird says there were absolutely so many of those 15-minute oxy doctors in West Virginia at one time, 20 just in Point Pleasant alone. Very small town, only 3 stoplights, 20 pill mills. And you know what? No lie. The individual I was sitting on Con Air with came from West Virginia. So yeah, that was one of the epicenters. West Virginia was huge. Ohio was huge, and then Florida. Those were like there were billboards. If you drove to Florida for road trips, there were billboards starting a couple of 100 miles out, talking about pain specialists and this and that. There were guys, and I know that Tommy will. He's going to go, "Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about." But there were people from all parts of the U.S. that would go to places like that, and they would fill up vans, rent a van that could put 25 or 30 people in it, and grab anybody homeless. If they had an ID, they would grab anybody with an ID, and they would drive them on a road trip. They would go down to these pill mills, get every single person there to go get prescriptions for everything they could, and they'd give the guy $150 and 10% of the pills or whatever the deal was. And this is what was really fueling all of these things ending up on the street in the black market. And yeah, the knee jerk reaction, like always, was to go from, this isn't regulated well. A logical person might say maybe we should regulate it,
Yeah,
but they went, "We'll just do away with it."
yeah,
And And the sad thing, people, is there are so many people. Joanna said earlier, they keep trying to put me on stronger meds, and it really upsets me. But with everything going on in my life, look, don't apologize for needing to be on pain medication, right? I mean, I abused pain medication not because I needed to be on it, but there are people. There, opiates are the greatest drug in the world if you just broke your thigh,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I mean, if you're really in pain, it is an essential drug. I don't ever want somebody gritting their teeth and saying, boy, the captain would be really disappointed if I took this prescription. You know what I mean? Because that's just not the hell we're talking about. We don't badmouth drugs, believe it or not, people. I mean, we're here to badmouth addiction, right? That's what we're trying to fight.
Yep.
It's
And
not about the drugs.
and Tara made a good comment. Says, which I know it's a long road, but we got to start somewhere. That's exactly right.
Yep.
You have to start somewhere, and unfortunately, or fortunately, just however you're looking at it, sometimes it's going to start with us the majority of the time. Because nobody's going to address it until we start speaking up, and that's happening. And the stigma around getting into treatments and stuff is softening. Okay, it really is. I see
No
it. I
question.
see it every day, and it's a great thing to see. But it's still not fixed. Okay,
No.
and some of the stats that Tommy was talking about today, and we talked about this prior to coming on. Those stats that we threw out there, I guarantee you, they're extremely lower than what is actually happening.
Yeah.
It is such a big thing there. It's yeah. If we were to actually see the numbers, the real numbers, I think everybody here would most likely, or anybody just listening to us, would be up in arms immediately. Because like that pharmacist movie I was talking about, this is affecting somebody's kid, somebody's mom, somebody's dad, somebody's brother, sister, cousin, nephew. Somebody you love is addicted to this stuff. I promise you. And somewhere on the line there, somebody that you might not even know they're addicted yet, but I promise you they are. Somebody is. Somebody
Yep.
that you love or care about is addicted to this stuff.
That, and I've said this before, and occasionally I get weird looks, but the only good thing about the crisis is that it's no longer an inner city. It's no longer a this race or that race or this kind of people or that kind of people. Um, it's starting to affect everybody. There are senators who lost kids. There are governors that lost kids. There are governors who have wives or husbands that are addicted. And as it becomes more prevalent and it touches more lives, then more people are going to get involved and do things like Seventh's doing, and just saying, you know what, enough is enough. So write letters, make phone calls, become a pain in the ass, because the truth of the matter is, it's a matter of life or death. Really is, and uh, you can look back and you can say every single administration going back to Ronald Reagan has screwed this thing up because it's a stone cold fact.
Yep.
But the question becomes, how much longer are we going to put up with that and say it is what it is, right? It's got to come to an end. Speaking of coming to an end, if we go on much longer, the big red button will bury this because of its length.
Yep.
It's not good to lead people into fear. I have a fear of doctors and anything that has to do with it. I will probably go out like Elvis one day.
Oh man.
No, we're not. We're definitely. I hope. Hopefully, it's not on a toilet. Hopefully, we're not fear mongering in this.
We're not.
But make no mistake. If somebody hands you a Percocet 30, right, and it didn't come from your prescription bottle, be very afraid.
There's
For
most
real, be
yeah.
very afraid
There's
because
either
the odds are somebody made it in a garage.
yep with fentanyl and benzos. So
Right.
it stuff is I showed it here, guys. 19 seconds puts you out, and then when you wake up, you don't even remember it. So that's all I'll say about that. But yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Alrighty, people. That's going to wrap up this fun-filled edition of the Lifeboat. We will be back tomorrow night, right here, doing what we do, and I promise you, it's going to be cheerier. But
Yes.
every once in a while, people got to beat the drum. If we don't, no one else is going to. I am Captain Tommy Scoville, and on the other side of the glass,
Mark Wages.
and look who showed up. Skipped work last week. That's a cat in the basket. Good night, everybody. We love you.